Hello everyone, and welcome to this demo of the ArchFlow framework, which is part of the Com360 Aurora framework for software development lifecycle. My name is Aldin Shekmehmedovic, and today I'm going to walk you through a framework that has fundamentally changed how I approach architecture work. ArchFlow is a spec-driven architecture workflow framework. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so let me break it down over the next few slides for you. By the end of this session, you will understand what ArchFlow is, why it exists, and in the follow-up session, you will see it in action on a real project. Before we dive into the solution itself, let's first maybe talk about the problems we often see in the projects. And I'm willing to bet that many of you have experienced at least some of those pain points. First, what we often see in projects is scattered artifacts. Often your requirements live in Confluence, your diagrams are in Miro or Lucid charts, your architecture decisions, well, they are buried somewhere in Slack threads or email chains. Secondly, no traceability. 6 months after launch, somebody asks, why did we build it this way? And nobody knows. The person who made that decision has moved on, and there is no documentation linking the requirements to the implementation. Then we often see skipped steps. We have all been there. There is pressure to deliver, so we jump straight to code. We skip the architecture phase entirely. And then 6 months later, we are paying the price, basically in technical debt and rework. And fourth, inconsistent quality. The quality of our architecture documents often depend entirely on who is doing the work. One architect produces maybe beautiful detailed specs, another one uses a single diagram on a napkin. There is really no standard to it. And finally, there is a newer problem, AI hallucinations. We all are using AI tools now to help with the architecture work, but if you ask an AI to generate an architecture, it will happily produce something that looks plausible, but it's internally inconsistent. It might contradict itself from one artifact to the next. And ArchFlow was built basically to solve all of those problems. So what is ArchFlow? At its core, it's a framework for disciplined architecture work. ArchFlow defines 6 phases that take you from raw requirements all the way to an implementation-ready specification. You start first with a requirements document. This could be a project brief, a product specification, or even rough notes from stakeholder meetings. You feed that document into the ArchFlow, and the first thing that happens is the foundation phase, which breaks it down into structured artifacts, formal requirements with IDs, constraints, stakeholders, non-functional requirements, for example. The messy input now becomes organized with traceable artifacts. From that point forward, everything now builds on this foundation. Then you move through 4 design phases. First is the logical phase, where you define your components and system boundaries. Next is the data, where you design your entities, APIs, and events. Followed by the security phase, where you define threats and define controls. And lastly, the infra ops phase, which covers your deployment architecture and operational concerns. And finally, the synthesis phase pulls everything together into a final deliverable. Notice the gates between each phase, gate 0, gate 1, and so on. These are quality checkpoints. You cannot progress to the next phase until your current phase passes its gate. This basically prevents shortcuts. And see that line at the bottom? Full traceability. Every artifact you create in ArchFlow links basically to its source. You can trace an API definition, for example, back to the component that exposes it, back to the requirement that demanded it, and nothing exists in isolation. So let me highlight a few key characteristics. ArchFlow is spec-driven, so it isn't just a loose process. It's governed by specification that the AI agent follows across all phases. We have a constitution that defines non-negotiable rules. The AI agent then reads these specifications and follows them. This means that whether you are in the logical phase or the security phase, the AI behaves consistently. It basically knows the rules. It's also decision first, and I will explain what it means in a moment. And critically, it's AI assisted, but human controlled. The AI helps you generate the artifacts, but you are still in control and you make the final decisions. So to summarize, Single input document, spec-driven standards across all phases, and decision-first workflow that solves the context management problem. That's basically ArchFlow. ArchFlow is built on 4 pillars. The first pillar is the Constitution. This is a set of documents that defines non-negotiable principles of all architecture work. Think of it like a legal document. It specifies things like all work must happen on a dedicated branch, all artifacts must be version controlled. We have naming standards. Every artifact gets an ID in a specific format. We have also diagram standards that ensure all diagrams use consistent mermaid syntax. We have templates for every artifact type. And these aren't suggestions, basically. They are rules. And the AI agents follows them just like a human would. The second pillar is the Analyze ADR Generate workflow. This is really the secret sauce of the ArchFlow, and I'm going to spend the next couple of slides explaining that in detail. The key idea here is that you don't jump straight to generating artifacts. You first analyze the problem, then you create architecture decision records or ADRs, and only then you generate artifacts based on those decisions. The third pillar is gates. There are 5 quality checkpoints throughout the workflow. Each gate has specific criteria that must be met. If you try to move forward without passing the gate, the framework will basically stop you. And this prevents the architecture phase problem I mentioned earlier. The fourth pillar is traceability. Every artifact in the ArchFlow has a unique ID, and every ID links to other IDs. A component links to the requirements it fulfills. An API, for example, links to the component that exposes it. A threat links to the asset it threatens. You can follow these links in any direction, basically, and this is how you answer the question, why does it exist 6 months from now, for example. Let me now explain the Analyze ADR and Generate flow in more detail, because this is what makes ArchFlow different from just asking an AI to generate architecture for you and how it solves the context management problem. Even with breaking the architecture workflow into phases, each phase is still large. There are many decisions to be made, many artifacts to generate, basically. If you ask an AI to generate all the artifacts for a phase based on the specification, 2 problems emerge immediately. First, the AI doesn't have enough context to make good decisions reliably. It might generate something plausible but wrong. And when you try to discuss it, you are discussing generated artifacts, which is messy and leads to context pollution pretty soon. And you end up generating artifacts multiple times. The conversation often gets cluttered with outdated versions, and you lose track of what was decided and why. Secondly, there is no room for meaningful discussions. Basically, the AI generates everything at once, and you are left reviewing a mountain of artifacts after the fact. And this is exactly what ADRs solve. Instead of generating artifacts directly, we first run an analyze step. The AI looks at your requirements and proposes the architecture decisions. Each ADR documents a specific decision. It identifies the key choices that need to be made, what technology to use, how to structure the system, where to draw boundaries. But there's a critical part to it. It doesn't generate any artifacts yet, basically. It just proposes decisions. And now you can have a focused discussion around those decisions with the AI about a specific decision. And you are not polluting the context with the repeated artifact generation. You discuss, you refine, and you accept the decision. Only after ADRs are accepted, you run the generate command. And now the AI generates the artifacts, but it's not guessing anymore. It's basically following the decisions that you have already approved. Components, diagrams, APIs, they all follow from the accepted ADRs, basically. And so why does this matter, you might ask? There are 4 reasons for that. First, it gives the AI clear directions. The ADRs tell it exactly what to generate. Second, it ensures consistency. All artifacts in a phase stem from the same set of decisions, so they cannot contradict each other. Third, it keeps the human in the loop. You approve decisions before artifacts are created. And fourth, it creates an audit trail. Every artifact traces back to an ADR, which traces back to a requirement. The analyze ADR and generate workflow doesn't only solve the context problem, but it also improves the architecture design in other ways. For example, without the ADRs, the AI guesses at the architecture decisions. It makes choices implicitly, buried inside the artifacts it generates. But with the ADRs, every decision is explicit. The AI follows what you have already approved. Then without the ADRs, you get inconsistency across phases. The AI might make an assumption in the logical phase and a contradictory assumption in the data phase. With the ADRs, all phases reference the same decision. They cannot contradict each other, basically. Then again, when somebody asks, why is this a microservice? You shrug, you don't know. With the ADRs, you point them actually to a specific ADR. The relation is basically documented throughout the workflow. Then what you often see is that when requirements change, you don't know what to regenerate. Changes cascade unpredictably down the road. With the ADRs, you update relevant ADR and regenerate the artifacts that depend on it. It's basically controlled. And here is a big one. Without the ADRs, reviewing architecture means reviewing everything. Every diagram, every spec, every detail. And with the ADRs, you review basically the decisions first. Once you trust the decisions, you can have more trust in the artifacts that flow from them. Your review effort is focused where it matters, basically. Look at the button diagram, for example. ADR1 drives a generation of component 1 and 2. ADR2 drives APIs 1 and 2 and event 1. ADR3 drives entity 1 and 2. The ADRs are basically your single source of truth, and artifacts are basically derived from them. Let me now walk you through the ADR workflow step by step using the logical phrase as an example. In step 1, you run the command /ArchFlow logical analyze. Then the AI reads your requirements from the foundation phase and starts thinking about the architecture decisions. It proposes ADRs, each with status proposed. These ADRs now cover things like, should this be a monolith or microservice? What are the component boundaries? What communication patterns should we use? And so on. And for each of those decisions, the AI documents the options it considers and the trade-offs involved. In step 2, you review and discuss. This is basically where the magic happens. You read through the proposed ADRs and you push back. Why did you choose option A over option B, for example? What happens to this decision if you need to scale to 10 times the load, for example? Have you considered team familiarity with this technology and so on? The AI responds to your question, it explains its reasoning, and sometimes you will convince it to change its recommendation. Sometimes it will convince you that the original choice was right. It's basically a dialogue. In step 3, then, when you are satisfied with the decision, you run /archflow.adr accept, followed by the ADR ID, and this changes the status from proposed to accepted. The decision is now locked, and this is your explicit approval. In step 4, only now you do run the /archflow.generate logical command. The AI now reads all the accepted ADRs and generates the artifacts for this phase. Component definitions, for example, boundary diagrams, interface specification, and so on. Because it's following the decisions you already approved, everything is now consistent, everything aligns. If you later look at the generated components and wonder why it was designed that way, you trace it back to that ADR. The ADR explains the decision, basically. The decision links to the requirements, and you get full traceability. So who is ArchFlow for? If you are a solution architect, ArchFlow gives you a structured workflow. No more starting from a blank page wondering where to start. You follow the phases, you pass the gates, and you produce consistent output every time with the ArchFlow. If you are a tech lead, ArchFlow helps with the handoff. When you give a specification to a development team, it comes with the documented rationale. They don't just know what to build, they know why. If you are part of an organization with the compliance requirements, ArchFlow gives you audit trails. You can demonstrate that every implementation decision traces back to a documented requirement, and that's gold for auditors. And if you are on a team using AI for architecture work, ArchFlow provides guardrails. It prevents the AI from hallucinating inconsistent architectures. The analyze ADR generate workflow keeps the AI on track. And so when should you use ArchFlow? Um, it's ideal when you are starting a new system or service. It's great for major redesigns of existing systems, and it's essential when you have compliance or audit requirements. It's particularly valuable when you are using AI tools to help with the architecture. Don't use it for trivial changes or bug fixes. It's basically designed for significant architecture work, not day-to-day code changes. And as a last step, let me give you a concrete picture of what ArchFlow produces at each stage. Um, in the foundation phase, you capture the requirements, constraints, stakeholders, and non-functional requirements. This is your input, and everything else builds on this. In the logical phase, you produce ADRs for the architecture decisions, component definitions, boundary diagrams, and interface specifications. This defines the shape of your system. In the data phase, you produce more ADRs plus entity definitions, API specification, and event schemas. This defines how the data flows through your system. In the security phase, you produce security-focused ADRs, threat models, control definitions, and risk assessments, for example. This ensures that your system is secure by design. In the InfraOps phase, you produce operational ADRs, deployment specification, SLO definitions, and runbooks. This makes your system ready for production. And finally, in the cities phase, everything comes together into a final specification document, a comprehensive diagrams, and a handoff package for the development team. Please note that ADRs flow through all the phases. The decisions you make in the logical phase inform the data phase. The decision in the security reference the components from the logical. Everything is basically connected. And each gate validates that you have completed the phase properly before you move on. So let me again summarize what we have covered in this introduction section. ArchFlow solves the scattered architecture problem. Everything lives in one place under version control with consistent structure. It's governed by a constitution. These are rules, not suggestions. Both humans and AI agents follow them. It uses the analyze ADR generate workflow. You make decisions first, then generate artifacts based on those decisions. This is what keeps everything consistent. It has 5 gates that ensure quality before you progress. No shortcuts allowed. It provides full traceability from requirements to implementation. You can always answer why does this exist? And it's AI assisted, but humanly controlled. The AI does the heavy lifting, but you make the decisions. In the next session, we will look at how ArchFlow is actually structured, the folder layout, the project organization, and how all the pieces fit together on a real project. Thank you, and see you in the next session.